and the word tension is kind of interesting, but I think what's going on between the two different, I guess, communities, you can say, is just a misunderstanding in terms of where people's intentions lie, and kind of just the perspective of a lot of people who may be in these roles that are affecting our community. There's I think a big gap of understanding in between that, and just a big I guess essentially miscommunication of information and perspectives, and not having a chance to have both parties at the table and have that conversation. So actually, to further explain it, I think for me personally, I actually had a friend who I went to high school. We grew up together, and he was actually one of the big instances where something in the Black Lives Matter movement kind of began from there. So he was actually one of the main victims, and being able to grow up with him and understand like his perspective, and we kind of had that same, upbringing and whatnot, and then understanding on the other side where someone came in and felt that he could be a threat, but not knowing anything about who he is, or how he was raised, what school he went to, the things that really makes a person a person. But just jumping to conclusion based off of stereotypes, essentially. And when you see someone, what you automatically associate with them with. So I think when I say like a miscommunication between the two different communities, it's really just if you don't have a chance to really communicate with other people or have conversations with people, your only perspective is going to be what you know or what you were taught, and that's not the case. For everyone's interpretations and everyone's perspectives are not the same thing, and the only way you can learn about others people's perspectives is if you're having those conversations. And I think when it comes to being able to understand in that situation specifically, like I said, both parties didn't have a chance to interact. So all that there was, what you saw in the media or what you understood from how you were raised or the things you were taught. And that perspective took over when it came to, quick reactions and whatnot in that moment. So it was actually Trayvon Martin. The Trayvon experience was one of my first like large exposures to the issue. And at the time, I think that's when it was more so just, starting up. A lot of the events were occurring. And I think Black Lives Matter actually spurred from that instance. And then from there, it just continued. But having to like be in high school and deal with that, actually was like a student leader back in high school as well. So I dealt with a lot of the like media coverage that would come to the school, and having that funneled to one student instead of like, because it was very overwhelming for the students. A lot of times it would just be reporters like outside of the school trying to get, stories and whatnot from the students and their perspective. So a lot of that was funneled through me, and I had to have those conversations. So going through that event was a lot, personally, emotionally, of course, but then also having to try to represent a larger group of people and get the story across, like the narrative that was being created around his persona and who he was as a person, and trying to, debunk those and try to explain to people who he really was as a person, but also trying to deal with, what you're dealing with yourself and having to cope with that emotional loss as well. To a certain extent, I feel like it's gotten worse. So there's like, I'm a business major, so like let's say there's a chart, and the first, like half of the chart is that it's finally being talked about. People are always posting on social media how they feel about these experiences, or there's always a news reporter reporting the next story, and all of that. It's more visual online, on social media, on the news outlets. But then with that, there's a lot of perspectives that are being adjusted, and there's a lot of students, or not even students, but children who are now growing up in this is their reality of where all they see in the media is, killings of different minority groups. And I think that's on one end, the kids who are being raised in this society where that's all they see, they're automatically gonna have this, I'm not gonna feel safe because all I see in the media is that someone is being killed, someone's being shot, based off of nothing more than what they look like. So I think it's definitely strained the relationship a lot more, but it also is a lot more visual, and a lot more opinions are being brought to the table because of the different way that technology plays a role in our society now. So we actually discuss a lot at our meetings. Sometimes we hold like different discussions, but not specifically just BSU, but even making it a community-wide thing. So BSU is just one of the organizations within our community, but there's also Black Affairs, which is a department under Multicultural Diversity Affairs. So having discussions through that venue as well, and different organizations on campus, fraternities and sororities. So it's definitely something that the community we talk about very often, and try to figure out what that social impact and activism looks like coming from the student perspective. Really just a lot of dialogue about being sensitive to the topic and allowing a safe space for people to express how they feel, and what these killings mean to them, and just how it's affecting us as students and as minorities growing up in America, and future leaders of the world or whatever. So it's a lot of conversations around just how the students feel and our perspective, and how we feel like the change should come about, and even sometimes trying to figure out how we mobilize ourselves to bring about that change. That's a hard one because it depends who you're talking to. So I know, and this is just my perspective, but I know an African American male will not feel as safe as someone else who's, someone else in another skin or another gender. And that's simply because of the events that have constantly spiraled out of control. It's just, you don't feel safe, but then there's these things like that back up the reason why you shouldn't feel safe. You get pulled over for a simple, if your headlights out, you get pulled over, you have this fear that you might not be able to drive off after your interaction with the cops simply because of the thoughts that they have based off of a Black male. And that's just the one example that I'm using. But I don't want to say that we feel unsafe. We're not in a constant, like, oh my God, like a constant panic, like, oh my gosh, I can't be here, I can't do that. But more so, this is our reality now, sadly, and it's just a different experience, walking around campus, or really just walking anywhere in America. So Black Lives Matter is more of a national movement. I think it was in the summer where we kind of made contact with them, to do some of like our demonstrations that we held in the summer for around the time of like Texas and Philando Castile, and Alton Sterling. So more of like a support piece, and tying back the things that we do here in Gainesville to the larger picture. But outside from that, it's more so just Black Lives Matter does their national movement, and the different things that they want. And then on a local scale, we do things that hit home for more of the, like the students, because we have more of that understanding. And then we try to loop them in on what's going on. So what we try to do is hold like events or forums or discussions where we can have both parties, I guess, in the same room, in the same place to have that conversation. I think it was 2 years ago, about a year ago, we had a opportunity. It was actually through MCDA and Black Affairs, where we had police representatives from the Gainesville community came to an event that we had. I forgot what it was called, but we had kind of that discussion between the students and the police, and letting them know how we feel, how can we kind of get to a better understanding. So that was about 2 years ago. And since then, it's not really much of like a working relationship or anything, simply because I don't know actually why it's not, but it's not like a consistent thing where we're like always have this open line of communication with GPD or UPD or anything like that. Yes, definitely. We've even this semester alone, I've had conversations with people where we want to reach out and have like some type of discussion, some type of like way to let them know, this is what we feel like would be useful or maybe would help solve the problem. Whether that's like adjusting how they're being trained or just like having them explain to us how we should act when we're being pulled over to ensure that we can drive off after that simple citation or that simple, routine traffic stop. I don't know, because I'm trying to look at it from both sides. Because personally, like from the minority side, being able to understand how you bring an issue to the table. We have this issue, we feel uncomfortable, and we need you to understand. We need you to react in this type of way. But then from the other side, being able to understand that, like let's say from the police side, we did this wrong, we made a mistake, and we want to fix it. So we, have that communication. So I don't know. I think I'm indifferent on that one. I think both should meet in the middle. But if I had to pick a side, I would say you can't expect someone else to do the work that you expect to see. You have to do it on your own. So in that sense, since it's our issue and it's something that's constantly affecting the people that identify as a minority, bringing it to the table to them, because at the end of the day, if they're not affected, if it's not, they can go home and their lives are unchanged. They don't have to worry about the fear or anything like that. And it's not a pressing issue for them. They're not going to be more concerned. Whereas this is something that we're constantly dealing with, and we probably have to be the ones to bring it to the table. The biggest outcome, first and foremost, would be that understanding piece of both, not just the people in charge on both ends, but having everyone have that understanding of what's going on and how the relationship is being fostered. But then also having that adjustment in the training and the consequences and the way that things are being executed. And a lot of it does go, you mentioned the way that officers or their performances are evaluated. A lot of it goes back to that when it comes to having to do, quotas and whatever the case is. So having those requirements and those trainings and stuff be adjusted to reflect a positive outcome when it comes to interactions between the minority community and the police departments.